This game is the one that everyone was really looking forward to. And Ohio State came out there, and my goodness, was that a performance in the first half or what? The Buckeyes were incredible and explosive, and in a lot of cases, it's like, frankly, overwhelming. Now, I'm not watching it on TV. I'm sitting there and watching this thing take place right in front of me, and my sons looked over at me, and they were like, dang, Dad, Ohio State's really good. And I'm like, yeah, that performance early in that game was an overwhelming performance in a positive fashion from the Buckeyes. My goodness. And if they play that way, this team is the best team in the country. And I know that a lot of us have said that for a long time during the course of the year, mainly because of their roster. And listen, you can evaluate their roster and certainly understand that they've got the deepest and most talented roster in the sport. And what we're starting to see is them find the right combination to unlock that team's best. They're playing to their full potential. Ohio State played incredible football against Oregon in the Rose Bowl. That was overwhelming, and it's the best team in the country. I will just say this before we get into any specifics about the game. Jeremiah Smith and his performance in the Rose Bowl was outstanding. Congratulations, Jeremiah Smith, because you finally showed, and he showed it through the course of the season, but really, that was a coming out party. When you do that in the Rose Bowl, 7 catches, 180 plus, couple of tugs. This guy was sensational. A couple of those in triple coverage. Didn't matter what was going on in terms of Oregon's plan. Jeremiah Smith was getting loose. I have never seen, let me scratch that. Twice in my life, I'm 42, I'm about to be 43. I've watched college football for my entire life. I played college football, and there was a moment when I was, I believe I was a junior in 2004, and we were playing Oklahoma in 2004, and Adrian Peterson was a true freshman. And I walked onto the field, and I saw him warming up on the other side of the field, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the best football player on the field, and he's a true freshman right away. And I have that same reaction when I see Jeremiah Smith now. They're the only 18-year-olds, true freshmen, that I've ever seen come in and just immediately I think to myself, they're the most dominant individual on the football field. That's as high praise as I can possibly give him. He's that good. He is absolutely tremendous. And when they lean into him and allow him to be great, boy, they reach their full potential. They were attacking on offense, attacking right away early in that game. And when they do that, this is a team that's very tough to beat. So I've called a lot of Ohio State games over the last couple of years. I mean, a lot. I've called a lot of games watching Ryan Day call plays. I've also covered Chip Kelly quite extensively in my career and several times this year, calling games, watching Chip call plays and go about it, and seeing and evaluating Chip's offense versus Ryan's offense. I think that the greatest misconception going into this season about Ohio State's offense is that this marriage in terms of the play caller with Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, the head coach, was they just run each other's offense. They've worked together before. Ryan played for Chip, and it's the same offense. It's not. It's not. Chip Kelly's offense has always been a more run-centric, heavy offense with the emphasis on running the football. Ryan's offense was always dynamic and explosive in the passing game. And we thought that the marriage, maybe you would get the best of both versions. The problem is, for the majority of the regular season, it was I hate to say it this way because they were still really good in the regular season, but there was some clunkiness to it as that was kind of figured out. What we're seeing now in the Tennessee game, basically in the playoff, Tennessee, and now in the Rose Bowl against Oregon, was the best version of both. You're starting to see they unlocked this combination. It's the best combination possible of what Chip brings to the table and what Ryan brings to the table. Because what this team can't do, and really maybe one of the only things that they can't do, but what they can't do is just run the football to get themselves started. And that's what Chip really wants to do. So you've seen games, and the example would be like Nebraska this year or Michigan this year, when they were stubborn in terms of trying to get the run game going, and it never got going. Both of those teams, by the way, Nebraska and Michigan, have really good, strong defensive tackles, and they couldn't handle the interior of those defensive lines. Okay, so they were hard-headed in those games. In the past, with Ryan's offense, they would have just started pitching it around. And Chip always hesitated to do that this year. And that's where the clunkiness kind of came in. And it was like, why isn't this offense with all this talent like really firing and being explosive and being overwhelming? And they just had to flip it. Rather than running to get the passing game going, they needed to get the passing game going and throw it early and often in order to pop some runs later. And now that's exactly what's happened against Tennessee and Oregon. So it's kind of this best combination of Chip's offense and Ryan's offense kind of melding together. I think that this spells real trouble for Texas, who has to play them in the next round in the semifinal, and whomever comes out of the other side of the bracket. Because if Ohio State plays offensively like they did against Tennessee and like they did against Oregon, they will win the national championship because they're the best team in the country. And to me, it's pretty evident. Now, on the flip side, Oregon is really good. Really good. I think the evidence of that is the way that they held their own after kind of the middle of the second quarter on. You see, in the stadium, it was overwhelming, and you're like, wow, this is an absolute rout. And yet, Oregon just kept kind of battling, and then you saw their explosiveness, in particular in the passing game. Dillon Gabriel getting loose a few times when he wasn't getting sacked and pressured in the back end. And when he was elusive and he would find somebody down the field on like those little half scrambles, and he would be able to find someone down the field. And then you look up and you're like, okay, they were able to move the football through the air. And it wasn't easy to do so. It was not easy to do so. And I don't think a lot of teams could do that. And I don't think a lot of quarterbacks could do that with the way that defense is playing. So I give a lot of credit to Oregon for not folding in that game. In fact, they got that score right before the half, and then they came out, and I thought to myself, like, boy, if they could just make this like a true 3-possession game, and they got it to a 3-possession game, and then they went out there, and that's when they couldn't get the stop. And that's when Ohio State finally went down the field, and they made it, I believe it was like, what was it, 41-15 or something along those lines. And that's kind of what sealed the game. Oregon was just down too much because of the overwhelming nature of that offensive game plan from the Buckeyes in the first quarter. And it was overwhelming. More on Oregon in just a moment. But the defense that they were facing, I talk about the right combination of Chip's offense and Ryan's offense kind of coming to fruition for Ohio State. Well, defensively, Jim Knowles has been there now a few years. And what he was when he first got there was a guy that was heavy into pressure. And they would run a lot of what I would call cover zero, no safeties back, and they would blitz a lot. And what happened is that they got hurt against Michigan and Georgia a few years ago and got beat because they gave up big explosive plays. So then last year they were like, we're not going to do that. We're going to limit explosive plays, and that's kind of it. And then what happened last year is they couldn't get to the quarterback. And so it's a juxtaposition. What are you going to do? And they went into the Oregon game earlier this year, and they kind of sat back and they said, we want to limit explosives. But in the effort to limit explosives, what they did is they gave up explosives. Why? Because there was no pressure on the quarterback whatsoever. When they would try to blitz, they did not get home. And when they tried to play coverage, they were singled up on the outside and they got beat down the field. So they had to change some of that structure. And so what happened is that they kind of married and unlocked the best combination of both. Being aggressive like he was 2 years ago and being able to limit explosives on the outside. So this defense is now playing their best. The offense is playing their best. There's one team peaking right now in the college football playoff, and it's Ohio State. That defense is playing so dominantly, and I'll tell you the reason why. It's nothing. Yes, it's what Jim Knowles does, and it's what he does in his game plan, but it's really the fact that their front six, the 4 down linemen and the 2 linebackers, are totally controlling the game. So when they can control the game, they can play exotic coverages in the back end. And when they can play exotic coverages, there's nowhere to throw the football. And that's why you saw so many times Dillon Gabriel sit there and just pat the ball. He had nowhere to throw it. It's the same with Nico Maliava. He had nowhere to throw the football. Dillon had nowhere to throw football. It leads to sacks. Now they had, 8 sacks and like 13 tackles for loss. It was a dominant performance by that front six. It really was. And then when they do pressure, they get to the quarterback. I tell you what, man, they're peaking. They are peaking. So that Ohio State team, that's going to be tough to beat. Now to Oregon really quickly. Oregon is a really good football team, because the way that Ohio State team played, it could have gotten a lot worse. To be quite honest with you, like 41-21 was a bit respectable for the way that the Buckeyes played. And I only think a few teams in the country could have kept it at 41-21. Oregon was one of those teams. I have an immense amount of respect for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. That was a remarkable regular season. It's a heck of a football team. And they got kind of hosed with the structure of this college football playoff. But first, why do I have an immense amount of respect for Dan Lanning? He always takes the high road. I love the way that this guy talks to his team, about his team, and to his fan base. As evidence, here's Dan Lanning after the Rose Bowl.
It's an unbelievable team. Coach Day and his staff have done an unbelievable job there. Don't want to discredit what our players have been able to accomplish this year. We had a great team. We just ran into a great team tonight, and we didn't play our best. I just don't think we had a good enough plan as coaches, tonight, and we got to find ways to prepare ourselves for these moments, better as a coaching staff. But I love that team. And those guys came out on top tonight. Obviously that's a team I think that has the ability to go win it all.
Man, class guy. He is a class act. I'm a huge fan of Dan Lanning. I really am. And a huge fan of the Oregon Ducks. And they're going to be back. They'll be back in this position. And he's going to be sick about this game. And here's the thing as a coach and even as a quarterback. When you win, it's we. And when you lose, it's me. That's the way. If you are a leader of any organization, whether it's a small group, a business, if you're a young quarterback out there, if you're a coach out there of any sport and you're listening to this podcast, I will just remind you, when you win, it's we, and when you lose, it's me. And when you listen to Dan Lanning, he understands that. He's not blaming the players. He says how much he loves the players. He gives the due credit to the opponent and talks about how good they are rather than the mistakes that they made in terms of his own team. And then when it comes to the blame game, what does he say? We didn't do a good enough job as coaches with our game plan. It's me. When you win, it's we. When you lose, it's me. And Dan Lanning understands that. It's one of the reasons why I really like Dan Lanning. I really do. This is a team that deserved better. This is a team that had the best regular season of anybody in college football. And this is supposed to be a sport that we care about the regular season. We've been trying to maintain the importance of the regular season through all of this postseason formatting. And yet, in that effort, we lost it. We lost the importance of the regular season. And because of that, the Oregon Ducks got absolutely hosed. And Dan Lanning is not going to say that. And he's not going to take that excuse. He's not going to sit there and say, hey, we shouldn't have had to play Ohio State of all teams, for goodness sake, after going undefeated and winning the Big Ten championship and being 13-0. He's not going to take that bait. But guess what? I will say it for him, because what was given to us as a structure was totally flawed. And then with that flawed structure, the committee gave us really poor seating. Everyone wanted to talk about who was in at the back end of the bracket. That was never the problem. That was never the problem with the college football playoff. The problem with this iteration of this playoff and this bracket was the seeding. Now, again, part of that structure, not the committee's fault. Part of it was their fault in terms of how they seeded teams. Texas and Penn State should have never been seeded over Ohio State. Who did that hurt? Not Ohio State. It doesn't hurt Ohio State, okay? They were going to have to play the first round game anyways, just like those other teams. They were going to host anyways. Who did it hurt? Oregon. It hurt Oregon. Okay, so the one team that deserved the most favorable draw in the playoff actually got the worst draw in the playoff. And that's not right. So the structure in some way is going to have to be fixed. It's going to have to be fixed. Think about the scenes that we saw in the first round at home sites in some of these environments. And it was fantastic. College football is meant to be played on campus, at least in my estimation. And I think most people's estimation. And I thought this round was not quite as exciting because it lacked the home campus environment. Oregon deserved a home game. They deserved to not only have a bye and get the rest, but have a home game. You saw the advantage in the first round. Remember when everyone was talking about like, oh, Indiana doesn't deserve this and SMU doesn't deserve that, and no one wanted to acknowledge how difficult it would be to actually go into some of these venues and win until it was their beloved Tennessee. And Tennessee got absolutely boat raced out of the shoe. And then it was like, oh, man, well, yeah, these environments are tough to win in. Well, why didn't Oregon get that same chance? So, again, structure and seeding. The seeding was wrong. Texas and Penn State should have never been over Ohio State, and the structure was wrong. You know, having Boise and frankly, Arizona State get byes probably needs to be changed. Now, I don't know exactly the structure that I would argue for. We are going to have a commissioner episode. I will give you 10 of my fixes that I would throw out there for college football. That's coming up in the weeks ahead. But right now, you just look at this, and Oregon deserved better. Duck fans, I think you deserved better. You showed out at the Rose Bowl, though. I will say that. It was quite a showing by the Duck fans out there in Pasadena. It was really good. You deserved a home site, not a neutral site. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.